Okay.
Thank you. And for this afternoon, we begin with Rita Severi.
Io le avevo fatto anche questo,
Sì.
ne avevo fatto.
Okay. Bello.
Do you have the program up?
Okay. Marita.
Do you have the program up?
Adesso.
Right. So probably we'll need to go to right. We may have to change the afternoon program a bit. So Nicholas Mander has already given his talk, and Rita Severi seems not to have quite arrived from Verona. Arjun, okay, we have Francesca Di Tifeci. She can possibly be the next speaker. And then Rita when she comes, and then Arjun, and then Amina Anelli, Dr. Llewellyn Jones, and Dr. Peter Berman. I'm sorry you're the last. We've just come back from the tomb. It's now beautifully restored. And Amina is the one who was in charge of the restoration. And but she didn't notice that they had even planted trees which are not Tuscan trees. They're all Indian trees around the tomb, which is a lovely detail. But it sort of gave me the same feeling that when I went to Australia and all the trees were different and they're not our species and so forth. And I think today has gone very well. It's been a bit of a muddle, I know. We've had, refrigerator door fell off, and then my printer died. And so there has been a bit of a confusion, but people are, everything starts 15 minutes later than announced. So they've all gone off to have coffee at the bar, and we'll be coming back. Peter, what came through? Was it all right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think a certain fuzziness at the edges doesn't matter. It seems more creative, more spontaneous, more fun.
Yes, yes. That's what Walter Savage Landor said about gardening. He didn't like them to be too neat.
No, I don't.
A marvelous gardener, a beautiful garden at the Villa Radesca in Fiesole, and greenhouses and so forth. But I took to heart his idea. It's sort of like the Muslim carpet maker. After he's made a beautiful carpet, has to cut a slat in it at an angle and then sew it up, because only God can make things that are perfect. And I found that a very useful lesson to myself.
Yes. Julia, tell me, have you got lots of flowers in your English cemetery? I caught a glimpse of flowers in one of your pictures, one of somebody's pictures.
Right. I think I lost 4 of them in the taxi this morning. They're not sari. They're Pakistani women's clothing. And I love them because I bought them on the web for almost nothing.
Right.
And the patterns are absolutely beautiful.
Lovely.
And I was sort of hoping people might like to buy them in order to, to recuperate some of the costs, because we didn't get any funding. And I just stupidly seem to have mislaid some of them. I've just got 2 left. But they have to be sewn. They're not sewn, they're the pieces for the shawl, the trousers and the tunic. So they're Muslim from Pakistani instead of saris from India. But the same beautiful, I mean, the Kashmiri, or what you call it, it's not arabesque, but that beautiful design of the curves, Fibonacci curves and so on, which I find very, very attractive.
Yeah, lovely.
Will it be possible for me?
Well, nice to have a little word with Julia.
And yes, I think if you begin in 5 minutes, 5 minutes will be all right.
Quella mattina io mi ha detto lei da tanto, ha detto solo quando esatto, quando dovevamo parlare non bisogna attenderlo, cioè no, attenderlo. Si parla da qui, esatto, ora aspetto.
E Peter e gli altri ti può vedere questa bellezza dell'Accademia. Questi sono i compagni dell'Accademia dell'Arte del Disegno, i ritratti sul muro. È un luogo incantevole, la camera è piena di scultori, c'è un bozzo che sembra di Giambalogna o Michelangelo, eccetera. Ci sono tesori. Tu sei, c'è bisogno di, unmute yourself. Are you still muted? Ask to unmute.
Hello.
Yes, right. Now I can hear you. No, it's a wonderful place to have. I've done 3 conferences here. This is the
Have
third.
you? Wow.
And they've become so tech savvy. They've saved my neck because when I arrived, I didn't know my password to even start the whole thing.
Really?
We solved that problem.
Yes, well, unfortunately, I have a resident IT consultant.
Yes. Right.
Well, Ross,
yes.
Also a companion. But I wanted to bring you in at the end to make the point that there are 2 of us from Scotland, not just me, and we're both companions.
Okay.
The image
Allora,
on the screen.
Iniziamo con questo discorso di mi scusi, su il senso della città e da professoressa di Feci.
Cioè iniziamo adesso? Allora,
If there's a paper in Italian, can I go into my email without upsetting everything? Yeah.
Sì.
Bene. Allora, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Io inizierò il mio intervento con una domanda. Che cos'è una città? E vi propongo un percorso di parola, cioè un viaggio all'interno della parola città. E ho avuto degli autorevolissimi compagni in questo mio percorso che adesso condivido con voi, che qui vi elenco. Il primo di questi è Giorgio Lapira e Fioretta Mazzei insieme a Giovanna Carocci. E vi porto qui oggi anche qualche parola che ho preso e cerco di trasmettervi da due autorevolissimi oratori. Il primo è il professor Panayotis Kantsas, psicanalista lacaniano, il secondo è padre Bernardo Gianni, abate di San Miniato al Monte, che ho avuto l'onore di avere come ospiti nei miei dialoghi dalla città sul monte 2023, di cui poi darò disponibilità appunto di queste due lezioni. E in questo mio viaggio, basato anche sull'analisi, io sono una linguista, mi occupo di parole appunto, in cui ho utilizzato anche l'analisi quantitativa, ho individuato alcune parole guida nello spazio e nel tempo. Poi poco tempo fa a pranzo parlavamo proprio della modifica di queste due categorie, dello spazio e del tempo. Ecco, le parole che io ho scelto in base appunto all'analisi dei testi come parole guida sono 6. La prima è essere umano in quanto essere parlante. Human being as a speaking being. La seconda è quella di animale politico, political animal. La terza è la parola relazione, relationship. La quarta è la parola vocazione, vocation. La quinta è la parola mistero, mystery. E l'ultima è la parola futuro, future. E parto con una, a mio parere, bellissima citazione di Tucidide, riportato poi anche da Hannah Arendt nel suo testo Vita Attiva, scusatemi, che è: ovunque voi andrete sarete una polis. Che vuol dire questo? Vuol dire che la polis è antecedente agli edifici. Prima viene la civitas e poi viene la urbs. Perché questo? Perché, come diceva Aristotele, l'essere umano è zoon politikon e konton logon, cioè un animale politico dotato di parola. Noi siamo corpi abitati dalla parola. Ed è proprio nella sua identità di parlessere che diviene cittadino, cioè abitante della polis. Quindi, dice sempre Aristotele, gli uomini sono esseri capaci di politica perché sono esseri capaci di linguaggio. Ho ben presente questa immagine della discesa di Mosè dal Monte Sinai con la tavola delle leggi, il decalogo. E questo decalogo, cioè queste parole, sono quelle che poi costituiscono l'essenza della polis e che da questo gruppo errante diviene polis. Quindi intorno a queste parole si crea il legame sociale. È dunque il logos ad essere decisivo nella polis, in quanto è colui che conferisce la posizione dell'essere parlante. La polis, la città, è il luogo del logos. Nella polis i cittadini conducono un modo di vita nel quale solo il discorso aveva senso e in cui l'attività fondamentale di tutti i cittadini era di parlare tra di loro. insisto molto sul discorso della comunità, della communitas, fondata sul fatto che i suoi membri sono esseri parlanti legati tra di loro. Infatti è proprio il fatto di essere parlante la caratteristica che distingue l'essere umano da tutti gli altri esseri animati. Il fatto esclusivo di parlare è ciò che segna la differenza tra lui e tutti gli altri animali. L'essere umano è un parlessere, come viene definito da Jacques Lacan. Il fatto di essere parlante è ciò che lo predispone per natura a vivere in una polis costruita per la realizzazione del bene comune dei suoi cittadini in un rapporto di relazione con gli altri suoi simili. Come sottolineato da Francesco Barone, ma possiamo andare molto più indietro e arrivare fino ai tempi di Socrate, il linguaggio è l'attività più umana. Heidegger afferma che il linguaggio è la dimora dell'essere. Nella sua casa abita l'essere umano. L'essere e l'essenza degli individui sono determinati rispetto all'essere e all'essenza del linguaggio. Allora, capire questo fondamento della polis è il presupposto necessario per andare poi a vedere quello che principalmente in Giorgio Lapira e Fioretta Mazzei sono gli elementi costitutivi della polis. Questo è la base, cioè l'incontro tra esseri parlanti che costituiscono il legame sociale, organizzato poi attorno a delle leggi. Dice Lapira il 6 novembre del 1953 all'inaugurazione del nuovo quartiere dell'Isolotto: ogni città racchiude in sé una vocazione e un mistero. Amatela e custoditela. Quindi già in questo primo riferimento che abbiamo a Giorgio Lapira abbiamo incontrato due di quelle che sono le parole chiave che io ho selezionato: vocazione e mistero. Vocation and mystery. In un altro celebre discorso tenuto da Giorgio Lapira a Ginevra, l'Assemblea della Croce Rossa Internazionale, il 12 aprile del 1954, Lapira fa riferimento al valore storico della città e quello correlativo della responsabilità storiche. Quando io prima ho fatto riferimento alla categoria dello spazio e del tempo, mi riferivo anche alla tripartizione della categoria del tempo, che è passato, presente e futuro, che in Lapira e in Fioretta Mazzei trovano poi questo unicum. Sia per Lapira che per Fioretta Mazzei la responsabilità che la generazione presente, noi oggi per esempio, abbiamo, ha sia una dimensione, diremmo noi linguisti, diacronica, sia anche legata al passato, ma al tempo stesso proiettata verso il futuro, cioè delle rifrazioni dell'eternità nel tempo. E si chiede Lapira, visti i tempi, vista la minaccia, e guardate che c'è una attualità incredibile con il presente momento storico. E si chiede Lapira, possano venire, è possibile che queste città, tutte le città del mondo, possano venire radicalmente cancellate dalla faccia della terra? In realtà È ormai inequivocabilmente provato che questa devastazione totale delle città dell'uomo dalla faccia della terra è possibile. Guardate l'attualità del discorso. Infatti, qualche bomba a idrogeno lasciata cadere su alcuni punti del globo può ridurre la terra a un deserto. Ecco quindi il richiamo alla rappresentanza e alla responsabilità di tutte le città della terra. Certamente loro parlano da Firenze. Firenze ha una vocazione particolare per la sua storia. Al tempo stesso, da Firenze c'è questo abbraccio a tutte le città del mondo, in quanto tutte le città sono responsabili. Responsabili per che cosa? Il diritto all'esistenza delle città umane, un diritto di cui siamo titolari, noi della generazione presente, ma del quale sono titolari ancor di più gli uomini delle generazioni future. Ecco qui che passato, presente e futuro si armonizzano. In che modo? Nel diritto, il cui valore storico, sociale, politico, culturale e religioso si fa più grande a misura che si chiarisce nella meditazione umana attuale il significato misterioso e profondo delle città. Nessuno, senza commettere un crimine irreparabile contro l'intera famiglia umana, può condannare a morte una città. Io domando, anche a nome delle generazioni future, che i beni di cui sono destinatarie non siano distrutti. E poi fa un riferimento la Pira alla sua dolce, armoniosa Firenze, creata in un certo senso sia per l'uomo come per Dio, per essere come la città sulla montagna, luce e conforto sul cammino degli uomini, non vuole essere distrutta. Questa stessa volontà di vita viene affermata insieme con Firenze, grazie ad una missione tacitamente affidata al sindaco del capoluogo toscano da tutte le città della terra. Città, ripeto, capitali e non capitali, grandi e piccole, storiche o di recente tradizione, artistiche e no, tutte indistintamente. Esse rivendicano unanimemente il loro inviolabile diritto all'esistenza. Nessuno ha il diritto, per qualsiasi motivo, di distruggerle. Le generazioni attuali non hanno il diritto di distruggere una ricchezza che è stata loro affidata in vista delle generazioni future. Si tratta di beni che derivano dalle generazioni passate, di fronte ai quali le presenti rivestono la figura giuridica degli eredi fiduciari. I destinatari ultimi di questa eredità sono le generazioni successive. Sono venuto qui a Ginevra, dice la Pira, per affermare il diritto all'esistenza delle città umane, un diritto di cui siamo titolari, noi della generazione presente, ma della quale sono titolari ancor di più gli uomini delle generazioni future. Questo incontro a Ginevra del 54 è quello che poi stimolerà, ispirerà, meglio dire, l'incontro a Firenze nel 1955, in cui appunto ci sarà il convegno dei sindaci dalle capitali di tutta la terra. Quindi da Ginevra si torna a Firenze, Firenze diventa luogo di abbraccio, di incontro e di abbraccio per tutte le città del mondo. E in questo incontro di nuovo la Pira si lamenta, urla, denuncia, piange la crisi del proprio tempo. E anche qui io ho letto davvero un'attualità incredibile con questo nostro particolare momento storico che riguarda non solamente Firenze, ma ovviamente tutte le città di nuovo del mondo. La crisi del nostro tempo, che è una crisi di sproporzione e di dismisura rispetto a ciò che è veramente umano, usa esattamente le due parole che poco tempo prima aveva usato Simone Weil, sproporzione e dismisura. Ci fornisce la prova del valore, diciamo così, terapeutico e risolutivo che in ordine ad essa la città possiede. Come è stato felicemente detto, infatti, la crisi del tempo nostro può essere definita come sradicamento della persona dal contesto organico della città. È bellissima questa immagine della città come di un corpo vivente, dal quale, ahimè, talvolta, anche oggi, anche in questo momento, la persona viene sradicata. Ebbene, questa crisi non potrà essere risolta che mediante un radicamento nuovo. Dallo sradicamento a un nuovo radicamento, più profondo, più organico della persona nella città in cui essa è nata e nella storia e nella cui tradizione essa è organicamente inserita. Questo, signori, è il significato dell'improvvisa e vasta risonanza che ha oggi nel mondo intero il tema della città. Parliamo qua da Firenze, siamo in collegamento con delle e con altre città del mondo, ma lo siamo con tutte le città del mondo. Il tema della città è un tema che va diventando l'aspetto sempre più marcato della cultura e della vita del tempo nostro. A tutti si fa chiaro, infatti, che in una città un posto ci deve essere per tutti. Un posto per pregare, la chiesa, un posto per amare, la casa, un posto per lavorare, l'officina, un posto per pensare, la scuola, un posto per guarire, l'ospedale. In questo quadro cittadino, perciò, i problemi politici ed economici, sociali e tecnici, culturali e religiosi della nostra epoca prendono una impostazione elementare ed umana. Appaiono quelli che sono, cioè problemi che non possono più essere lasciati insoluti. Perché questo? Perché è proprio nella città, in questa dimensione di legame sociale, in questa dimensione comunitaria che l'essere umano cerca la sua realizzazione. Perché per ciascuna di esse è valida la definizione luminosa di Charles Péguy, essere la città dell'uomo, abbozzo e prefigurazione della città di Dio. E questo è un aspetto molto particolare sia di La Pira che di Fioretta Mazzei, sono perfettamente allineati. Infatti queste parole a cui io faccio riferimento si trovano nei testi di entrambi. Non solo guardare alla città come memoria, come patrimonio da trasmettere, non solo, ma anche come prospettiva di futuro, come anticipazione di quella che sarà la città celeste. Firenze come anticipazione della Gerusalemme celeste. Firenze come, ripeto, tutte le città del mondo. È molto bello questo focalizzarsi su Firenze, ma aprire le braccia a tutte le città del mondo. Questo è un procedimento linguistico comune ad entrambi gli autori e che attraversa tutti i loro testi. Città arroccate attorno al Tempio, irradiate dalla luce celeste che da esso deriva, città nelle quali la bellezza ha preso dimora. Beh, certamente il tema della bellezza è un tema molto caro sia alla Pira che a Fioretta Mazzei. È un tema in cui è necessario che nella città si respiri bellezza. E attenzione, la bellezza, come vedremo, non è un edificio pur bello. Noi siamo pieni di edifici bellissimi in questa città, ovviamente. Ma è un edificio che esiste prima nel legame tra le persone che poi lo andranno ad abitare. Ed ecco il collegamento all'essere umano come essere dotato di parola, caratterizzato dalla parola. Quindi ha una bellezza anteriore che poi viene iscritta nelle pietre. Sono città collocate sulla montagna dei secoli e delle generazioni, destinate ancora oggi e domani a portare alla civiltà meccanica del nostro tempo e del nostro futuro una integrazione sempre più profonda ed essenziale di qualità e di valore. Ognuna di queste città non è un museo. Com'è forte questo messaggio per questa nostra città di Firenze e non solo. Non è un museo dove si accolgono le reliquie, anche preziose, del passato. È una luce ed una bellezza destinata ad illuminare le strutture essenziali della storia e della civiltà dell'avvenire. Ecco, in queste parole il tempo si anima, perché è un tempo, come io amo dire, tripartito, dove il passato, il presente e il futuro formano un unicum e non se ne può levare un pezzetto, perché altrimenti la bellezza dell'insieme svanisce. E mi piace a questo punto condividere con voi anche un brevissimo scritto di Fioretta Mazzei che io ho trovato in occasione del decennale della sua morte in uno scritto della presidente dell'associazione Fioretta Mazzei, la professoressa Giovanna Carocci. Questo è un articolo apparso su Toscana Oggi nel 2008, in cui lei dice: Fioretta, infatti, aveva in mente un volto ben preciso di Firenze, volto teologale che rispecchia qualcosa dell'infinita bellezza della Civitas Dei. Ecco di nuovo questa parola che è futuro condivisa dai due. La città come organismo vitale, composto di persone che vivono le une accanto alle altre, in un'aspirazione comunitaria che tenti di costruire giorno per giorno, con umiltà, sapienza e amore, il bene comune. Visione del resto costituzionalmente sancita. Invece, attenzione, vedeva intorno a sé un muro di incomprensione, quando non di rispettoso disprezzo. E pochi giorni prima della morte, avvenuta nel 1998, scriveva una specie di testamento contenuto, riassunto in queste poche parole. Una città può riflettere una bellezza addirittura superiore alla bellezza di un viso, perché è una bellezza comunitaria, voluta da tutti, condivisa. E come perfino la bellezza naturale ha bisogno di essere accompagnata, scoperta, anche corretta dallo sguardo e dalla mano dell'uomo. Così la bellezza cittadina ha bisogno di una partecipazione, di un occhio d'amore collettivo. E attenzione qua, il degrado di tante città è dovuto proprio a questo, alla non educazione, alla non comunità. La vita comunitaria infatti riflette la vita del cielo nei suoi misteri che non sono solitari. Perché il nostro occhio sia capace in profondità di bellezza e di poesia ci vuole un atteggiamento interiore umile, semplice, costante, perché nonostante tutto camminiamo verso il massimo del semplice, dell'umile e del lineare. Dio è semplice. La costruzione e il denaro possono investire tutto, ma non è da questa analisi che ne usciamo, ma in un rinnovamento interiore al quale tutti aspiriamo e a cui non vogliamo rinunciare. E io voglio soffermarmi, e mi avvio a concludere, sulla parola degrado. È una parola che magari non vogliamo ascoltare, ma di cui non possiamo fare a meno, perché senza consapevolezza non si supera il problema. Aveva ragione Fioretta quando parlava di degrado. Oggi potenziato dalla iperconnessione, siamo sempre connessi. Ci appare sovente una città svuotata del discorso dei suoi cittadini. Ricordiamo che in primis la città è un incontro di esseri umani parlanti che poi diventano cittadini. Così la città muore, svuotata dalla sua lingua, che diventa spesso una metalingua, un insieme di edifici svuotati dalla parola. Spesso la città perde la vita divenendo una specie di, avete in mente quelle maschere di cartapesta ripiegati su se stessi. È l'era del post-umano, o si potrebbe dire dell'umanità superflua, profetizzato sempre da Hannah Arendt. Io sono molto felice di poter essere qui oggi in questo bellissimo edificio in via Or San Michele numero 4, in questa associazione delle Arti del Disegno. Per questo ringrazio Sor Giulia, la Presidente Acidini e tutti gli organizzatori, perché mi ha dato proprio questa idea, no? Di un bel edificio che con difficoltà, con inciampi, però abbiamo oggi noi la possibilità di rivitalizzare qua con le nostre parole. Vi ringrazio.
Anche davvero nello spirito della nostra serie di convegni sulla città e il libro. Grazie. Grazie. Ci sono commenti, domande anche da qui fuori con Zoom? Non delle. Allora, visto che Veri non è ancora arrivato a Verona e non vedo Arjun. Da questo penso che possiamo tornare a avere Anina.
Sono delle diapositive, no, queste qui. Ah, allora il computer. Ok.
Amina Anelli. Era lei che ha fatto il restauro del monumento del principe indiano, del comune differente, e ha fatto questo convegno possibile con sua generosità.
Grazie. Devo trovare il file. Ecco. Okay. Allora, già, a questo punto già mi conoscete. Sono da condividere. Sì.
Per farlo vedere anche a
Sì,
casa.
sì, siamo già in connessione, no?
No, vedo lei, ma non è il file.
Ah, il
va
file.
condiviso.
Ah, ok. Sì.
Ha fatto i diapositivi su questo?
Sì.
Sì, bene, ok.
Può condividere. You can share
Condividere
all
il share screen.
only all parties. Sì. Ok.
Oh, questo. Sì, ok.
Tu devi condividere il video con i partecipanti.
Ok, voi siete...
Queste.
Ok.
Clicca. Questo.
Ok.
Esatto.
E poi slideshow.
No, si vede doppio?
Sì.
Oh.
Ok. Ok. Bene.
Ok. Sì. Buonasera. Allora mi presento per chi non è qui, mi chiamo Amina Anelli e lavorando all'interno del Comune di Firenze ho avuto il privilegio di seguire il restauro del monumento al principe indiano. Parlerò quindi della storia, ma soprattutto del restauro di un monumento dedicato ad un giovane principe indiano che per ventura si è trovato a morire a soli 20 anni nella nostra città. Questo accadeva nel 1870. Lo scenario in cui questo succede è il Parco delle Cascine. Si fa, scusa? Giulia, come si fa ad andare avanti? Ok, questo è il Parco delle Cascine. Come vedete è un parco molto esteso. È un parco che appare proprio un luogo emblematico per esprimere lo spirito di questo convegno, in cui si parla di dialogo e di restauro. Da una parte, infatti, rappresenta il punto d'incontro di personaggi provenienti da tutto il mondo, che qui idealmente si incontrano e conversano a dispetto delle distanze temporali. Abbiamo il Maharaja indiano, abbiamo George Washington, abbiamo, questa è la fontana del Narciso, dove è stata applicata una targa nel 1954 che ricorda l'ode al vento dell'Ovest di Percy B. Shelley. Abbiamo Dostoevsky, che è stato l'ultimo accolto, il monumento che è stato eretto pochi anni fa, un paio di anni fa, e poi e così via. I cipi della toponomastica, questo è dedicato alla Nightingale. L'intervento precedente. Ok, sì, passiamo. Ok, che devo fare? Qui. Sì, così si passa, sì. View? Sì. Se no non riescono a vedere. Invite, no. Quindi magari. Ok. Quindi si parlava dei personaggi che convivono all'interno del Parco delle Cascine. La regina Vittoria, Percy di Sicilia, abbiamo detto Kennedy, Lincoln e molti altri. Ciascuno di essi è ricordato e, parafrasando l'intervento della dottoressa Di Tipeci, trova il suo posto in un pezzo della nostra città, in questo pezzo della nostra città. D'altra parte anche un parco monumentale, una moltitudine di monumenti grandi e piccoli, di cui difficilmente abbiamo la percezione, che accompagna noi visitatori nel lungo percorso di oltre 6 chilometri, da Piazza Vittorio Veneto fino all'estremità opposta ovest, dove si trova il piazzaletto dell'Indiano. Ora quindi riesco ad andare avanti, indietro. E quindi si tratta di un patrimonio storico e culturale che necessita di essere preservato e valorizzato. Laura? Non riesco ad andare avanti. Oh, sì, ok. Allora io vorrei far notare, quindi qui siamo al Parco delle Cascine, qui sulla sinistra c'è il piazzaletto dell'Indiano e il parco si estende per tutta questa lunghezza. Vorrei far notare tutti questi piccoli punti. Questi piccoli punti sono una moltitudine di monumenti di cui noi non ci rendiamo conto quando camminiamo, ci accompagnano, basta semplicemente osservare quando camminiamo. E in merito al tema della valorizzazione e della conservazione, anche qui questo convegno diciamo, è emblematico, nel senso che abbiamo parlato di John Ruskin, che aveva una sua teoria del restauro ben definita e che è stata studiata da molti architetti che come me affrontano il tema del restauro. Il Parco delle Cascine è il più grande parco pubblico della città, si estende per circa 6,5 km, abbiamo detto una larghezza di 640 metri, costeggia la riva destra dell'Arno dal centro storico fino alla confluenza del fiume con il torrente Mugnone. La costruzione del parco ha inizio quando Alessandro I dei Medici ne acquista i terreni e li bonifica per farne una tenuta di caccia e un'azienda agricola per la famiglia dei Medici. Con il passaggio del Granducato di Toscana dai Medici ai Lorena, il parco diventa luogo di svago e in particolari ricorrenze viene anche aperto al pubblico. A partire dalla fine del 1700, circa 1785, ad opera di Giuseppe Manetti, un architetto incaricato da Pietro Leopoldo di Lorena, vengono realizzati i primi lavori per la trasformazione di questa tenuta in parco. Con l'Unità d'Italia nel 1861 le Cascine passano al demanio, successivamente nel 1865 passano al comune. Quindi questo è Alessandro de' Medici che abbiamo appena citato e Pietro Leopoldo Asburgo Lorena. Questa è la planimetria delle Cascine intorno al XII secolo e quella è la posizione del monumento appunto. Abbiamo qui una planimetria del 1873 dove si vede come sia stato costruito e strutturato il parco. Siamo arrivati quindi al 1865. Cosa succede a Firenze? Cosa succede in India? Nel 1865 Firenze subentra a Torino come capitale d'Italia. Non entriamo qui in vari approfondimenti in merito a ciò che è successo in questa città che fu completamente travolta proprio per riuscire ad accogliere la capitale, la funzione di capitale. Ma questo periodo questa funzione viene svolta per soli 6 anni. Nel 1871 la capitale si trasferisce a Roma. Cosa succede a Kolhapur, in questo piccolo stato del paese meridionale di Maratha, in India? I rapporti con l'Inghilterra verranno raccontati nell'intervento successivo e non mi addentro in questo argomento, così come la vita del giovane principe di cui parleremo. E possiamo dire però che, ecco, questo è il Raja di Kolhapur. Il precedente Raja, quello muore nel 1866 senza eredi e adotta sul letto di morte il figlio della sorella, un ragazzo di 16 anni, il cui nome era Nagojero, non so come Molte delle notizie relative al suo viaggio si apprendono dalla lettura del diario scritto dal principe.
Dov'è l'entrata per il cavo? Mari?
Una lettura interessante, perlomeno in quanto spaccato dalla realtà dell'epoca. Notizie della sua vita vengono date nell'introduzione e nelle appendici del diario. Viene restituita l'immagine di un ragazzo riflessivo e gentile che si sorprende dei costumi e delle abitudini dei paesi che visita. Nelle immagini pubblicate nel diario, che poi sono questa e questa, il giovane Maharaja indiano non sembra avere 20 anni, ne dimostra di più, così come anche nella rappresentazione scultorea. Nasce quindi nel 1850, diventa il nuovo Maharaja e riceve un'educazione improntata sul modello inglese. Sposa 2 donne, una delle quali gli darà una figlia che morirà presto. L'altra moglie invece è ancora una bambina. È il primo principe indiano regnante a recarsi in Inghilterra per un viaggio di studio, ma anche di cultura. Incontra la regina Vittoria a Windsor 2 volte e muore a Firenze il 30 novembre 1870, durante il viaggio che dall'Inghilterra avrebbe dovuto riportarlo in India. La lettura del diario per me è stata molto interessante, ma ho voluto sottolineare 2 passaggi. Uno è proprio suo e l'altro invece è una lettera, tratto da una lettera che lui scrive ad un suo amico in India. Quest'ultima dice, per esempio, scrissi a questo mio amico, lui scrisse a questo amico che si rese conto quando si trovò in Inghilterra di quanto fosse insignificante un Raja di Colabor fuori dal suo territorio.
No, non c'è là. Guarda, ti sentono, stanno sentendo loro. Sì, sì.
Per favore, potreste staccare l'audio? Would you turn off the audio?
L'audio.
Possiamo.
Would you turn off the audio?
Right. I don't know how we
Please.
can. Right. I don't know how to. Okay, proceed from there.
Okay.
The technical has gone away. I think you just have to carry on. See, let's go.
Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Mhm.
Okay.
Quest'altro.
Dovrebbero spengerlo loro. Sì, sì. No, ma credo che abbiano, non lo so, credo che abbiano spento. Però.
Sì,
Prego, prego.
Qui, va sopra qui. Ok, bene. Bene, Arjun, no?
Si può escludere dall'audio.
Perché hanno spento l'audio?
Ok, Arjun è qui. Ok, tutti sono qui. Va bene, continua.
Allora, l'altro passaggio che mi ha colpito è questo, che lui imparò presto, he soon learned, che l'ostentazione, che il dimostrare l'ostentazione non è necessario per la dignità. E quindi diciamo una sua impressione nel momento in cui conosce un'altra realtà diversa dalla sua. Allora, il monumento è stato eretto per commemorare il giovane indiano, abbiamo detto, è situato laddove il corpo del principe era stato cremato. Il sindaco di Firenze, Ubaldino Peruzzi, rende possibile per la prima volta a Firenze la pratica della cremazione secondo il rito induista. E come possiamo leggere qui, Ubaldino Peruzzi era stato membro del Parlamento toscano e diventa sindaco di Firenze nel 1870. Altro personaggio è il Major Charles Mount, cioè l'architetto che progetta il monumento. Quindi la struttura architettonica è progettata da Charles Mount, il busto invece è progettato da Fuller. Charles Mount lavora con l'Apur in Bengale a Bombay e Progetta edifici tra cui il monumento in memoria del Raja di Kolhapur in stile indo-saraceno, come da lui stesso definito. Riguardo invece a Charles Fuller, nato in Gran Bretagna, Charles Fuller visse a Firenze per diverso tempo e fu allievo dello scultore americano Hiram Powers. Visse inizialmente nel quartiere di Santo Spirito e poi nel villino Fuller in via Farinata degli Uberti. Questo è il monumento al principe indiano. Dunque il monumento è completato nel 1874. Già nel 1897 si rendono necessari i primi restauri, lavori di scalpellino e muratore, opere di verniciatura e dorature si trovano nei documenti, affidati rispettivamente alle ditte Salvadori e Bianchi. La parte lapidea del monumento è stata realizzata a Fiesole, mentre le fusioni della ghisa sono realizzate in Inghilterra. Questa è un'immagine del 1884. Qui sinteticamente questo è il rilievo dove viene evidenziata ogni parte del monumento. Quindi abbiamo una base in pietra, un piedistallo ancora in pietra, il busto di marmo. Il monumento appare come una struttura a baldacchino che si eleva su un ampio basamento in pietra circondato da una ringhiera in ghisa modellata a calci, volute e motivi floreali. Sulla base centrale, che ha dei bassorilievi, si ergono 4 colonnini tortili che sorreggono una cupola rivestita con lastre di rame. Il baldacchino funge da scrigno per il busto di marmo che raffigura il principe. Il busto viene scolpito tenendo come immagine un'immagine che abbiamo visto sul diario. E il busto quasi sicuramente era colorato, come testimoniato da alcuni autori. Si rammenta infatti Oscar Wilde che visitando una tomba nel cimitero cattolico di Roma disse: questa tomba, mi sembra fosse la tomba di Keats, disse: questa tomba sarebbe più bella se fosse colorata come quella del principe indiano. Prima di eseguire il restauro sono state eseguite delle indagini diagnostiche su dei campioni, è stato rilevato effettivamente che il colore c'era. Allora, sui 4 lati della base del piedistallo in pietra indicato nell'immagine sono poste 4 targhe che riportano un'iscrizione in 4 lingue: italiano, inglese, hindi e punjabi. Il monumento alla memoria del principe indiano è Rajaram Chhatrapati Maharaja di Kolhapur, morto a 21 anni in Firenze il 30° giorno di novembre 1870, quando dall'Inghilterra tornava alla patria. Chasman Captain, architect. La ringhiera metallica più esterna è stata posta successivamente alla costruzione del monumento. Inizialmente era stata realizzata in legno a fungere da ulteriore protezione. Passiamo allo stato conservativo. Potete vedere c'è un ponteggio che circonda un colonnino. Il monumento si presentava in una condizione di generale degrado. Nelle 2 ringhiere che contornano la struttura a baldacchino si riscontravano numerose parti mancanti e la completa ossidazione del metallo dovuta all'esfoliazione della verniciatura, di cui rimanevano solo alcune tracce. Nella struttura a baldacchino le condizioni peggiori si riscontravano su uno dei colonnini in ghisa, che presentava una profonda fessurazione longitudinale e che per questo era stata messa in sicurezza e sostenuta da un apposito ponteggio. 2 delle pigne, queste, una qui c'è, vedete, e questa non c'è, 2 delle pigne appese agli angoli non c'erano più, e al di sotto dell'intradosso, cioè in questi punti, c'erano delle fessurazioni orizzontali. La pietra risultava in molti punti disgregata e in alcuni punti polverizzata o esfoliata o addirittura in fase di distacco. Mancavano o erano distaccate parti di cornici, molte decorazioni floreali, bassorilievi a foglia, le teste dei pavoni e molte delle volute decorative. Il basamento e la base presentavano attacchi di alghe e muschi dovuti alla maggiore esposizione agli agenti atmosferici. Anche il piedistallo del busto e il busto stesso, tra questi, benché più protetti dalle intemperie, versavano in condizioni critiche a causa dell'attacco delle polveri e delle aggressioni biologiche atmosferiche. Un albero caduto sul monumento nel 2005 aveva danneggiato la copertura in rame della cupola. L'intervento di restauro è iniziato, ecco, queste sono ancora immagini che rappresentano lo stato conservativo. Qui si può vedere la differenza della superficie nel momento in cui abbiamo iniziato la cultura. Queste sono le indagini diagnostiche, che sono campionature e analisi di laboratorio necessarie per conoscere i materiali e i vari interventi eseguiti nel tempo e per scoprire anche quali fossero le cromie originali. L'intervento iniziato nel 2019 e concluso nel 2020 è stato svolto mirando alla conservazione dei caratteri originari dell'opera, mediante l'uso di materiali e tecniche compatibili con quelli esistenti, con l'obiettivo di restituire adeguata leggibilità al monumento. Restauro lapideo. Il restauro degli elementi lapidei, quindi della gradonata, del basamento, degli archi intradossali, in pietra serena del fusto di marmo. È iniziato con il preconsolidamento, quindi prima si consolida per non perdere preziosi frammenti del paramento decorato, purtroppo in fase avanzata di distacco, soprattutto nelle parti soggette ad infiltrazioni d'acqua. Successivamente è stato svolto il lungo processo della pulitura con la rimozione dei depositi incoerenti, cioè quelli che non aderiscono bene al supporto, quindi vanno via con una semplice pulitura con un pennello morbido, come terriccio, depositi pulvirulenti, e poi con applicazioni di biocida. La fase della disinfestazione è importante perché rimuove le colonie di microflora prima della loro rimozione meccanica, cioè le uccide, al fine di evitare la volatilità e la trasmigrazione delle spore infestanti. Poi si è proceduto con la rimozione dei depositi coerenti mediante impacchi a base di carbonato di ammonio veicolati da pasta cellulosica e sepiolite, dove necessario. Erano presenti anche stuccature cementizie, incoerenti, incongrue, e sono state rimosse mediante l'uso di bisturi e microscalpello. Poi si è proceduto con una doppia applicazione di consolidante a base di silicato di etile e infine sono stati ricostruiti molteplici frammenti previo calcolo siliconico e stuccature a base di calce idraulica naturale. Tutto è stato completato con un protettivo finale, un polisilossano trasparente che non doveva creare comunque un effetto filmogeno, è stato applicato alla fine. Il restauro pittorico ha riguardato essenzialmente l'intradosso della cupola, decorato con costoloni in rilievo a foglie color oro su fondo azzurro. Il film pittorico era una pittura a secco, cioè era stato dato non ad affresco, ma risultava steso su un supporto a base di gesso. La superficie della pellicola presentava sia qualche piccola crepatura che qualche rigonfiamento e anche delle esfoliazioni, in special modo in corrispondenza degli interventi pregressi. Numerosi nidi di ragno aderivano sulla superficie con grande tenacia, soprattutto negli interstizi. La pulitura è stata eseguita soprattutto a secco, vista la componente gessosa del supporto e la fragilità del colore. È stata condotta ovviamente su tutta la superficie. In alcuni punti è stato necessario l'utilizzo di microbisturi per interventi appunto localizzati. Le macchie sono state rimosse con piccoli impacchi con bassa percentuale di carbonato di ammonio con contatto limitati nel tempo. I nidi di ragno sono stati tutti rimossi e poi si è proceduto con il consolidamento, realizzato con iniezioni a tergo di malta consolidante, proprio per far aderire il film pittorico al supporto. Malta consolidante a base di calce naturale. Infine è stata eseguita la conguagliatura cromatica mediante applicazioni di più velature con pitture minerali ai silicati addizionate con pigmenti e terre fino a raggiungere il tono che era stato ritrovato, quindi questo azzurro. Passiamo al restauro delle leghe metalliche. Questo è stato forse l'aspetto più interessante e innovativo. E le leghe metalliche le troviamo nei colonnini e nelle ringhiere. I 4 colonnini in ghisa sono cavi all'interno, hanno uno spessore di circa 2 centimetri. Uno di questi presentava una profonda fessurazione longitudinale che inizialmente si era ipotizzato di consolidare con l'inserimento di collari in acciaio. Successivamente invece è stata individuata una tecnica più rispettosa del risultato estetico, consistente nell'utilizzo di fibre di carbonio applicate con resine epossidiche. Ecco, potete vedere qui la striscia di fibre. Sono stati realizzati dei fiocchi di collegamento all'interno del colonnino in modo da far collaborare maggiormente la massa di ghisa ed evitare scorrimenti. La conformazione geometrica del colonnino e la sua decorazione hanno permesso di mascherare la fibra all'interno della scanalatura elicoidale. Sono poi stati ricostruiti piccoli petali mancanti, potete vedere qui in questa immagine, e previo calco con gomme siliconiche sugli elementi originali superstiti con resina epossidica pigmentata. Come i petali sono state ricostruite anche le 2 pigne che abbiamo visto prima. La ringhiera interna in ghisa, questa floreale, dopo un lavoro di minuziosa sabbiatura e pulitura è stata consolidata mediante iniezioni di resina epossidica, ricostruzioni in resina, ma soprattutto integrazioni con nuovi elementi in ottone poi verniciati. Il tutto è stato fatto con rilievi 3D e stampe in materiale plastico. Questa è un'immagine di alcuni particolari prima e dopo l'intervento. Vedete, solo Giulia c'era il conteggio, c'era con una tettoia che copriva. Questo è proprio alla fine, c'è ancora sul retro la recensione, è proprio alla fine dell'intervento. Questa è una piccola chicca che riguarda un sonetto che Renato Fucini compose per questo evento, e questo sonetto rappresenta proprio lo scalpore, la meraviglia che questo evento ha suscitato nella gente comune. Nel 1870, infatti, Fucini, con lo pseudonimo di Neri Tanfuci, scrive La bruciatura del principe indiano. È un dialogo fra 2 personaggi, Neri e Eliseo, che parlano proprio di questo evento particolarissimo per la città di Firenze. Questo intervento è stato possibile grazie diciamo, al Comune di Firenze, dove io lavoro, responsabile del procedimento l'architetto Caselli, l'ingegnere Sandro Dreoni, il direttore, e la collaborazione quindi di un team di persone che a vario titolo hanno partecipato. Quindi l'impresa esecutrice la RAM, Restauri Artistici e Monumentali, con l'architetto Jacopo Mannucci in particolare. Ringraziamo il Maharaja Chhatrapati di Kolhapur, che è stato contattato, che è a conoscenza di questo restauro, Sor Giulia, e la dottoressa Chiara Barontini, che è una mia amica che ha svolto per me tante ricerche a Londra, che lei vive a Londra. A questo punto farei un appendice, visto che abbiamo parlato in questo convegno della Regina Vittoria, e vorrei citare appunto Aldo Palazzeschi, che nelle stampe dell'Ottocento parla di questo viaggio che la Regina Vittoria fece a Firenze. In occasione di questo viaggio, o meglio, in occasione del 60° anno del regno della Regina Vittoria, fu realizzata a Firenze una fontana. Questa fontana fa esattamente da contrappunto al monumento al principe indiano, perché si trova in piazza Vittorio Veneto, dalla parte del lato centro storico. Questa è un'immagine della seconda metà dell'Ottocento, prima degli interventi urbanistici realizzati dal piano Poggi. Potete osservare qui la fontana, vedete com'era? Questa è un particolare, realizzata tra il 1897 e il 1900, anno della sua inaugurazione ufficiale, in occasione del 60° anno di regno della regina Vittoria d'Inghilterra. Fu voluta dalla comunità britannica fiorentina, progettata dall'ingegnere Lorenzo Piuli-Bon. Allora, la fontana è realizzata in marmo rosso di Verona, posta su un basamento di pietra arenaria a gradoni concentrici. Purtroppo la fontana nel corso degli anni, a seguito di atti vandalici, è stata privata di vari ornamenti lapidei e metallici. Vediamo com'è adesso, eccola, soprattutto com'era prima del restauro. È stato scelto per il momento di non ripristinare l'impianto idraulico, ma la vasca è stata colmata con una resina e con un materiale di riempimento, in attesa che possa essere riqualificata completamente la zona. Questo ultimo restauro è stato eseguito lo scorso anno e l'impresa esecutrice è la Valentini Ventura Restauro Opere d'Arte. Progettista e direttore dei lavori sono stata io. Grazie a tutti e alla prossima.
Grazie. Ci sono domande o commenti? Sì. Right. Arjun, si può unmute? Ok, bene, welcome. Sarà la sua relazione ora, va bene? It's going to be your talk now, is that all right?
Yes,
And
yes.
yes, do you have screen sharing or not?
I can do that, yes.
Okay.
Should I begin?
Laura, can you help him do the screen sharing? Yeah. Arjun ha bisogno di condividere sì, lui.
Il suo o
Lui ha bisogno di screen sharing con i suoi diapositivi.
ok, ma dovrebbe farlo lui.
Arjun, you can do the slides. Okay.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing. I think you need to enable me to do that.
Noi blocchiamo lui di fare questo. È
Sì.
possibile dare la possibilità agli altri? Questo secondo, sì.
Yeah.
Va bene ora? Can you try it again, Arjun?
Yes, working.
Yeah.
Is it working now?
It is working.
Okay, right.
Sì.
Right.
Yeah.
Bene. Arjun Shivaji Jain, lui è responsabile davvero per questo evento e lui inizia con un viaggio nella sua città di Delhi, fatto nel modo di John Ruskin, Mornings in Venice. Lui farà in inglese Mornings in Delhi. Bene, okay. Arjun, you can begin.
Yes. All right. Good evening, everyone. This is going to be somewhat different, not academic too much, this talk of us. Considering that the next part of the conference is going to be in Delhi, both Julie and I thought it appropriate to at least focus one session on this. So, taking after John Ruskin's 1886 Mornings in Florence, I wish for the following to be what humble guidance I may offer to travelers in Delhi, both Indian and not, to where I was born and brought up, and returned to live and to love. As did Ruskin, I intend to deliver it no otherwise than I would to friends, who may have asked me for my views on it, not caring really how wrong or right academically they might perhaps turn out to be. So, as did Ruskin, over a course of a week in spirit, I shall be walking with you around my city, Who knows how much of eras bygone we may encounter, how many of the numberless poets and painters, or lovers, in fact, we may meet. We will see what we do, eyes unsullied by dogma. We will see like a child, full-breathed and bright-eyed. And maybe decide also to see, and it is indeed a decision, to see happy-hearted. Before we begin, you will be well advised, I imagine, by doctors to take your shots and everything, so you mayn't catch anything particularly nasty while you're in Delhi. Delhi belly is what it's called, I understand. Let me tell you, but that you will indeed catch something, and that no shot in the world really will help you prevent it. You may indeed fall sick and decide to leave on the very first morning, but you may decide to stay forever. That is a possibility. A guest is akin to God, it is believed here in these lands. The first morning, we land in Delhi. Ah, what a morning indeed. What perfect weather. Can you feel it on your skin? It seems it rained last night. Well, don't you open your eyes until I tell you to. Now, see carefully, as your eyes might react to all this suddenness. The air is colored quite differently, is it not? A bright orange, I would say, and vague, as though veiled with white. It smells different too, you know, spicy and thick, of incense, heavy, as though you could collect it in a jar and take it back with you. I suggest you don't speak for a while at all, but listen. Take the city and the country, the subcontinent, and perhaps the world by extension. Most of today, let me tell you, you may not actively remember, but only as in a dream. So do seize the moment. Do dream the day away today. I know you will not be sleeping. It is not that sort of a dream. There is no rest here to be found, at least not initially. Your senses are all awake, aren't they? Tell me, have you seen as many colors before? Smelled as many scents? Heard as many sounds or touched as many things? Even felt as many feelings? All at once? Have you been inside an ocean and lived to tell the tale? Well, this is it. Notice your attention becoming sharper by the second. The weight of sensation is upon you, infinite sensation. Like lightning, it is piercing through your consciousness. There's no making sense of anything here. This is what life, pure life, raw life looks like. The second morning. Good morning. Did you have a good night's sleep? You had something, didn't you? You need not answer. I wouldn't be surprised if your heart was still beating as fast as yesterday. It does take some time. We are walking today through Chittaranjan Park, where I have been living for some years now. This is the Bengali part of the city. The part of town the poet Tagore might have lived in way there. But Bengal in Delhi, you ask? Bengal is another state of India. Why, yes, all of India is in Delhi, really. And with time, you will see all the rest of the world as well. The honks, yes, of the cars. It is something we need constantly to contend with here. Depending upon where you think Delhi ends, somewhere between 17 and 43 million people call Delhi their home. To give you some idea about what that is, this is somewhere between the whole of the Netherlands and more than the whole of Ukraine. It is funny though, overall, how everything seems still to be working. If anywhere there was chaos in the world, it has got to be here. If anywhere there was anarchy, that too. And yet everyone seems to remain calm, more or less, or everyone, more or less, more the poor than the rich, I have to say, does have a smile on their face. Even the constant honking, honestly, it's more a, hey, I'm here, than a get off. And oh, you notice the animals as well. The stray cats and stray dogs, and the stray cows. Yes, get used to it, as they have, the animals. Lions may well be the kings of the jungles here in India, but cows are the kings of the cities. And oh, however could we forget the monkeys? How dare we? The third morning. You know, in my childhood, we really did have snake charmers as well. Not joking at all. I lived in Yusuf Sarai as a child, once location of a medieval rest house and now a proper Delhi colony, an urban village. For all its population and pollution, Delhi is, believe it or not, one of the greenest cities in the world. As you of course can see. Last month, the samel tree, the red cotton silk was all in bloom, in celebration of Holi perhaps, the festival of colors. Oh yes, we have loads of them, these festivals, every couple of weeks, seriously. But yes, it was samel then, and soon it will all be amaltas everywhere, laburnum, and soon after gulmohar, the beautifully crimson royal poinciana, which you can in fact eat. It is somewhat sour. Let me take you to Deer Park next, rather nearby, and my favorite park when I was a child. Look, there is a peacock and rabbits and deers. It does smell very nice, doesn't it? I think it smells of innocence. And oh, you see the mulberry trees over there? Quite ripe now. You want to have a taste? Come on, don't be so delicate. Pick one off right from the branch. You know, the darker blackish ones are sweeter. Washing it takes most of the sugar away. So really, you shouldn't mind it. And see that eucalyptus tree as well. Come, I'll show you something. Here, rub these dry leaves in your palm and crush them and have a whiff. Yeah. I see you're distracted by all the names of lovers carved in the trees here. Fourth morning. How impertinent of me to not have asked you for food yet. How could I? It's been 3 days already. Let me take you to Chandni Chowk today, the moonlit square. Now this is old Delhi, the real Delhi, if you will, the Delhi before the British. It is, believe it or not, rather like the Gothic quarters in Barcelona. If only there were less people, or the government would pay more attention. Anyway, if you thought you'd seen everywhere the day you landed, you are not prepared for this, I swear. All kinds of odd people you will see today, all kinds of odd things going on. The architecture, though crumbling, is beautiful though, isn't it? God knows how many years these buildings have been here. All arched and latticed and filigreed almost. Yet no one to take care of them. Well, let's begin at the Red Fort today, stronghold of the Mughal Empire, the penultimate or perhaps third to last great city of Delhi. From 7 or 9 or 11, who can tell the number of cities Delhi has been. Every little lane here sells something completely different. A whole market devoted to spices, another to paper, another to jewelry, another solely to kites, another one whole market for the borders of saris. And oh, food. Now that is here on every corner. You know, I do think the real art is always out of food. The artists all pretend, I feel, with their paintings. But you should beware, Delhi's food is not for the faint-hearted. It is vegetarian, yes, almost all of it, but spiced to a degree you might feel yourself in hell. But give it time and it will be a hell you will crave. Would you like some chole kulche or kachori? Or some nagari perhaps? Naan katai? The fifth morning. Did you notice all along your left yesterday, the sequence of buildings we were passing? I'm not sure if such a thing exists anywhere else in the world. One by one after the other, neighboring each other, we passed across a Jain temple, a Hindu temple, a Baptist church, a Sikh Gurdwara, and 2 medieval mosques. Unbelievable, isn't it? But let us go to the Lodi Gardens now. Yet another of the many Delhis, now converted into a park. The sheer number of monuments Delhi has really is staggering. They're just there, here, there, everywhere. And they are so common, no one looks at them for the second time, really. Well, the Lodi Gardens are lush, as you can see. They are thriving with vegetation. The buildings are all, I don't know, 1,000 years old, all built of quartzite, gray, quartzite from the ancient Aravalli range. All but a memory from the past now, mostly. This part of Delhi, as you can see, of New Delhi, is proper New Delhi. I do wish sometimes the rest of it could also look like it. New Delhi is where the politicians live. The Lodi Gardens are their gardens, it seems. This and all around, you may forget that you are in Delhi for a minute or two. My own feelings for it are quite mixed. I do love it, it is beautiful, but so is so much more, and if only it were taken care of better or at all. The taxpayers' money, I think this is where it goes to the habitation taxpayer. The sixth morning. And now that we come to the end of these 6 days in Delhi, I would like to take you somewhere new today. Somewhere you can feel where the city might proceed towards if tended to carefully. It is a sad fact of this country, as many in this region, that its citizens, if given the choice, will indeed flee it. The moral fiber of the nation, once famed, if you delve deep enough, you may not find it too easily today. The fickleness of certain peoples, really, it is unbelievable. And yet places like these also do exist. Places like Red House. I do wish all of Delhi could look like this someday. Built progressively of brick, of naked brick and lime, latticed in every pattern, and arched wherever an arch can fit. There were no plans for this, no architectural blueprints. It was worked upon like a sculpture with love every day. Would you like to sit in the open courtyard for a while? Would you like some tea perhaps? The smell of the Rangoon creeper is all about us, threatening to make us stay here forever. Look, a band of youngsters have just come in. They are here for a workshop, it seems. They speak in English, though not affected, and are dressed quite fashionably now. And how beautifully they feel a part of all this. Have they all known each other, do you reckon? Or has this place done something to them? The sunlight is so very beautiful. All of life feels so very beautiful here. Let us not make haste for tomorrow. This feels quite good. Seventh morning. Well, perhaps a week wasn't at all sufficient for such a tour, was it? As did Ruskin, I'm afraid I could not quite pick out any very particular works of art for you to consider. But it really is difficult here, you know. Art isn't there anymore in the obvious sense, anywhere to see, to look at here. Or perhaps it's everywhere. It's not quite looked at the same way at all, you see. Things are not as classified, as conquered, as made slaves here of the intellect. They are more to be felt, I feel. More to be sensed by an open heart than mind. Still, the murmurs of the centuries do reside as promises of the future. The city continues, God knows how, but it does. Say, would you like some mementos from this trip of ours to keep with you? To take back with you? Let us go to Delhi Hata, the center of the metropolis. You can tell me whatever catches your fancy. That will be my gift to you. How about this gold embroidered skirt? This indigo scarf? Any of these infinite heavy rugs? Or mango? Yes, mangoes, hundreds of varieties, the king of the fruits. If you have never had them before, you will not perhaps believe how sweet they are, and how in the world such sweetness can be sucked out of the ground. There is something in the soil here. There is indeed. How else could Gandhi have been born here? Tell me. How else Mahavira? How else Buddha? How everything else in existence? But you know, I am afraid I may have trapped you. Who in their right mind could leave these alleyways? These are not the streets of Delhi, but the canvas of an artist. The chosen city of the world, Delhi. The city that the heavens have looted and laid waste, time and again. Delhi alone is the city of love, honestly. And I am the inhabitant of this destroyed garden. But this is the end of our tour. So farewell and see you all soon. Thank you.
Arjun, that was splendid. The colors. We here in Florence are all dressed mostly in black, and I'm seeing the vibrancy of these colors. And there was Ruskin talking about mornings in Florence, which was not his own city, relishing the otherness of a Renaissance city. And you were in the midst of Western culture. You were a nuclear physicist. You gave it all up to become a poet and turn back to your native city, to Delhi, but also with the sense of generosity of sharing that, because we need it. I'm just so grateful for your discourse. It was beautiful. I don't know if Peter Berman wants to add something to that. Unmute, right. If you can undo your microphone, yes.
I've done it, yes. Well, like you, Julia, I absolutely loved that meditation, like a prose poem. And I was with you in imagination, walking in Delhi, experiencing those different sites, some of which I have seen and experienced, like the Lodi Gardens and Chandi Chowk and so on, obviously. But no, it was magical, really lovely, and such beautiful images.
Yes.
Thank
right.
you.
And Peter was talking about, I put some slides at the beginning of my talk. I went and bought these very cheaply. They're pieces of cloth for making not Indian saris, but the muslin shamis and so forth. But they're and I somehow managed to lose 4 packages in the taxi this morning. Those are not the most beautiful ones that I have. But I just wanted to share this artistry which we have lost. but the designs, the flowers, the nature, this is what William Morris was doing. This is what John Ruskin loved. Not the mechanical ugliness that we have today of our modern industrialization, but instead this confluence with nature and humanity and the respect for it. So I just splurged on these. They weren't expensive, but if anyone wants to take a set of them, you can make a donation to the association. But you do have to stow them yourself. They're not sewn already. They just tell you how they could be, but they are beautiful. And I'm just so grateful. I don't know what's happened to Dr. Llewellyn Jones. She was meant to be giving her speech. Okay, right. There's someone who's trying to need to be admitted, but this is from India. Welcome. Right, I think they're trying to get in, are they? Right, Asha, yes, welcome.
Julia Maria would like to ask.
And Maria Lara Pancini, and Nicholas Manda is here. Sir Nicholas Manda, yes.
Sorry, if it's possible, I would like to ask a question to Arjun. At first, very thank you for your very interesting presentation. And I would like to ask you, because I have a friend of mine and he lived in Thailand a lot. And he said me that, for example, in Thailand, people are very peaceful because of a religion. And so even if there are sometimes poor people, they are not criminal, and because of a religion. And I would like to ask you, how is the situation in India, if it's the same, that people are so peaceful and so kind, or if it's different?
Right, Arjun. It might have been so had Gandhi got his way, but he didn't. Right, you answer.
As far as religion is concerned, no, I don't think it plays too much of a role. It is in the background all the time, but no one really talks about it. Honestly, I was asked whether I was religious or not the first time I was in the UK. At that time, I had not even, I had no idea about the meaning of this question, what it meant for me to be religious. I was just whatever I was. It was not a question at all. No one really questions it or is too bothered about it. It is always there in the background. If we are a peaceful people, I would say yes, on the whole. Especially with religions such as Buddhism and Jainism having taken birth here, whose basic tenets are non-violence. These are religions based fundamentally on the principle of non-violence. I don't think you could have that if that was not already present, if it wasn't there in the air everywhere. Also, I would say yes, it is a peaceful country. Of course, but as we are getting, as urbanized as we are getting, as everything is becoming globalized, as more like the West we are appearing, there is disturbance in this piece, because we are no more Indians, really. We are becoming, it seems a very, very bad copy of maybe America. So we are taking the bad out of it and maybe losing whatever good we had. That is the tragic part of it. But on the whole, still, I would say, yes, we are peaceful. Maybe because of religion, it's but not as not explicitly.
Okay, thank you very much, and very beautiful picture. And have you took this picture by yourself, or?
No, they are from the internet, but out from the internet, but yes, because I have been to all of these places myself, so I could make a good selection.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Peter, do you want right. Question from Gabriella or no? No? Okay. I think because we don't have Rita Severi, she's meant to have come from Verona but hasn't come. And I think now, and we don't have Dr. Llewellyn Jones, so now it's Peter Berman's turn to speak about.
Oh,
Are you ready?
my turn. Yes, I
Great.
could be.
Thank you.
Hang on. Took me by surprise, of course.
Right. Do you have slides?
I do. I'm going to
See if you can do slide sharing.
I've got a PowerPoint presentation.
See if it will open.
Just a moment. It's all open. Where is it? Share screen. There we are. Got it. Yes.
We're not getting your image yet.
Is the PowerPoint open? It should be, yes. Don't see it. We're puzzled by what we're seeing.
Yeah. He has slides, a diapositive da condividere.
Okay,
Like before.
yeah.
Not slides, but a
No,
PowerPoint.
multiple. Right. Okay, try again. Peter, try again to see if they will work.
This one. Is that just the text? Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Slideshow from the beginning. Now what do you do?
I think she's already asked. I don't mind to question.
Okay.
Have you got it?
No, we don't yet.
No.
Was it down on your line below? And then did you click on the slideshow?
Yes.
I've got it on my screen. Hang on a moment. We seem to have.
Yes, while Peter is working on that, we allow
We haven't slipped out of the Zoom, have we? Because there it is. Share screen.
No.
We're trying to share screen. Oh, there it is.
Okay. Yes. Now.
Are you seeing it? Oh, good.
Yes, we're seeing it.
See, you can begin. Oh, he doesn't have the sound.
Right. Can you all see now?
Right.
Shall I start? I'm not getting any response. Arjun, shall I start?
Yes, do start.
Yes, please.
Right, okay. Well, I don't know if many people recognize what's on the screen now at the beginning, but it is John Ruskin's tomb in the churchyard of the village of Coniston in the English Lake District, where he lived from 1871 until he died in 1900. And for me, it is a very special place of pilgrimage. We shall be going there next week on Monday and staying in the village for 4 nights in order to participate in the opening of an exhibition by another companion of the Guild of St. George called Deirdre Kelly, who lives in Venice. But one occasion is recorded by the image on the left. It's our former master, Clive Wilmer of the University of Cambridge. whose introduction to Ruskin and whose selection of Ruskin writings we all read in Britain. It's so good. Anyway, we had a study weekend about Ruskin, and the closing sequence of it, which sadly only about 4 or 5 of us remained for. People rushed off to catch their trains or to drive back home. We spent in the churchyard at Ruskin's tomb, and Clive read the last 2 paragraphs of Praeterita, which are so beautiful and so wonderful. So at the end of that, I suppose we felt so close to Ruskin, literally and imaginatively as well. It's a very, very beautiful place, the churchyard. And in England, at least, the churchyards, the historic burial grounds of the parishes, are maintained by the local parish, by local people, mostly on a volunteer basis. And so it always seems to me that even though the maintenance may be imperfect, it's always done with love, as it seems to me you do it at the English cemetery in Florence. So my topic is landscapes of memory as exhibited through the historic burial grounds of the city of Edinburgh. Edinburgh is a World Heritage Site, and there are 6 historic burial grounds within the World Heritage Site, and a great many others on the periphery of the city as well. So anyway, the monument to Ruskin was designed by this man you see on the screen. Julia mentioned him this morning, William Gershom Collingwood, who was Ruskin's secretary for quite a long time, I think about 15 years, and became a close friend of his, really understood and empathized with Ruskin, and wrote the first 2-volume biography of Ruskin, which I have on my shelves. And I love it because the very first paragraph says that if you want to understand Ruskin, you have to understand that he's a Scot. And since we live in Scotland and are culturally Scottish ourselves, we find that very inspiring. But he was a distinguished man in his own right. He became a professor of archaeology at the University of Reading, and he was a brilliant painter and designer. Julia showed a detail of one of his paintings. There are quite a few paintings by him of John Ruskin, including the famous one she showed with the long beard. And here is an example of his own drawing. This is a detail of the tomb of Ilario di Corretto in the cathedral at Lucca, which I've seen myself on a number of occasions, but was one of those experiences Ruskin had that changed his life. And he writes, as you all probably will know, with great feeling about this effigy of this young woman of the 14th century. And I think Collingwood has really caught it. It almost looks like marble, doesn't it? It's extraordinary. So he was a very gifted designer. And on the other hand, rather strangely for someone who was a pivotal figure in the arts and crafts movement, somebody else had to execute his designs for sculpture. So what you've got there is on the right, a tiny detail from Ruskin's tomb, which is known as the Ruskin cross. It's a particular shape of cross which Collingwood more or less invented, influenced by Celtic predecessors. And the larger picture shows a war memorial, one of about a dozen that he designed in the Lake District in Cumbria, and made by a man called Mr. Miles of Ulverston. Anyway, it is a curious thing that a gentleman, a scholar, made the designs, and a humble craftsman, but happily no longer anonymous, actually made them. At least we know Mr. Miles's name, although I don't know his first names. So going now to Edinburgh, we look at the west end of the High Kirk of St. Giles, which was the cathedral of Edinburgh in the Middle Ages. And it's had many changes and restorations over the years. And it was surrounded by a very extensive burial ground, of which only archaeology can tell us. But in recent years, it's become, or gradually is becoming, a landscape of memory again. And I suppose you could say the earliest intervention of such a kind was the monument that you see in the picture on the left, which is of the 5th Duke of Buccleuch, who was also the 7th Duke of Queensberry. And the figure on the top is by Sir Joseph Edgar Bowen, who was Queen Victoria's sculptor in ordinary. She very much liked his work, and he often got royal commissions. And the base was designed by a very good and sensitive arts and crafts architect called Robert Rowand Anderson. And we're sitting in a building designed by him in another part of Edinburgh. But you have to imagine, instead of that paved floor surface, there were previously, for centuries, graves and monuments. And at the east end of the High Kirk of St. Giles, there are 2 new monuments, both by coincidence put up in 2006. One of them has a life-size figure of Adam Smith, the influential economist of the late 18th century, one of the leading figures of what we call the Scottish Enlightenment, when Scottish architects, artists, poets, philosophers, economists were among the leading thinkers of the known world at that time. And then on the right, the monument to James Braidwood gives me particular pleasure because fire officers seem to me rather a neglected group, and yet our safety depends upon them. And this particular chief fire officer for Edinburgh invented a strategy of dealing with urban fires, which saved many, many thousands of lives. And he was so famous that he was invited to be the chief fire officer of London subsequently, and sadly lost his own life in a fire in an act of courage. So remarkably, around the High Kirk of St. Giles, we have not only a river of tourists the whole time during daylight hours, but we also are actively remembering some of the special people of Scotland's past. So I'm going to take you now to the Greyfriars burial ground. And on the way, you almost can't avoid passing this little figure of a dog. He is not buried in the Greyfriars burial ground, but his master is. And there's a great story about how when his master, who was a police officer around about 1860, when his master died, he kept vigil by his master's side for a day and a night. And after his master had been buried, every day he would visit the grave, grieving. And there are many stories about illustrating the relationship of mankind with animals, and dogs are often involved in them. And I find it rather strange that there is such a small literature about the relationship between human beings and dogs. There's a biography of her dog by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, if I remember correctly. And I've come across a few other accounts, but very, very few. And yet it's almost universal, this love of animals that many of us have, and the relationships being by no means one-sided. So anyway, in effect, this sculpture has created a tremendous focus. You have to queue up to take a photograph of it. And behind it is a bar. He's called Greyfriars Bobby, by the way, and behind him is Greyfriars Bobby's bar, and then the entrance to the burial ground of the great church of Greyfriars. It's not a medieval church. There was a medieval church, there was a monastery, but it was destroyed in the late 16th century as a result of the violence that followed the Reformation. And a new church was built on almost, but not quite the same site between 1602 and 1620. And meanwhile, after the destruction of the medieval Abbey Church, Queen Mary, Mary Queen of Scots, as we call her, in 1562, granted the garden of the Greyfriars Monastery to the town of Edinburgh as a cemetery or burial place to relieve the overfull churchyard of the High Kirk of St. Giles. So it's probably the first recorded example of such a gift. And at that time, the burial grounds became the property of the town, the local authority, as we might say today, which is a sort of problem, which I'll mention a bit more later. Now, I took the photographs for this talk last Monday, Easter Monday, which was a very beautiful day and a very busy day in a city like Edinburgh. But when I came to Greyfriars, I was amazed at how many of the visitors were so young. As you can see, even in that photograph, many teenagers, people in their 20s and early 30s, delight to see so many young people. And I suppose that they know about the Greyfriars churchyard more than in the past because of Edinburgh being a World Heritage Site and being so clearly and well explained online and in every other way that we communicate with each other at this time in our history. But as you see, quite a big thing is made of the fact that the church and the churchyard are open, and even that it is free admission. Although I did find when I went into the church that I was very strongly encouraged to make a donation. I don't mind about that, but it was interesting that it says free admission as a way to draw people in. Visit this famous kirk today, walk through 400 years of our history, and importantly, pause for a moment of stillness, because another point that I'm wanting to make is that these burial grounds or cemeteries can be still for us places of pilgrimage, just as I said the tomb of John Ruskin at Coniston is for me a powerful place of stillness and a pilgrimage. So look, there you are, more young people. This is the east end of the church. There are two entrances to the churchyard, and this is the one most people use. And you see people clearly having a happy time, which is wonderful. You see a lot of rather hard surfaces, which I don't like quite so much. It's becoming rather urban and hard in character, just where it should be soft and yielding and gentle. And it is possible to make paths other than with tar macadam and stone. But nevertheless, it has been done reasonably well. When you go further into the churchyard, you find that much of it is like an urban park. And this is a tendency in Britain, at any rate, which I very much regret. It's considered very often that the tombs are of danger, and they certainly are dangerous if they're not maintained. So maintaining these beautiful spaces and places is something which, as a society, we need, I feel, to give more attention to and be prepared to pay more money for out of public funds. But there is a sense also in which, as a pleasant place to walk, with a unique view of the city, as it were, from behind, it's very pleasant. But another consequence of treating a burial ground as though it were a park is that the one thing that is well maintained, even perhaps over maintained, is the green sward of the grass. So it's like a garden lawn and not like a burial ground at all. And it tends to be the one skill that the people employed in looking after these cemeteries have. They know how to manage and how to cut grass and to do it well. And the other thing that happens is that specialist arboriculturalists look after the trees, because they too can become a danger both to themselves and to people. So another aspect of St. Giles, the Greyfriars churchyard, which is unusual, is that parts of it are made into gardenesque beds, as you see there. And at first, I was inclined to think that this was out of character, but when we remember that Greyfriars was a monastery and actually well known for growing herbs for healing and for food, but I think mainly for healing, then it seems rather imaginative to garden in the same way today. And as I put there, the areas seem homely, real, and cared for with love, and so avoid the municipal look so often found in British burial grounds, and probably not only in Britain. In the Buildings of Scotland volume on Edinburgh, it's said that the churchyard has the best 17th century monuments in all of Scotland. And there you see a magnificent group of them, each one a miniature masterpiece with a good deal of carving, beautiful lettering, and of course, in the inscriptions, a great deal of information about people, their occupations, their origins, sometimes how they came to die, and so on. And then there are also a surprising number of very architecturally ambitious mausolea. Here is one to somebody called Sir George Mackenzie. I can't read the inscriptions, you know. Can I have a look? Why is that doing that? Oh, I've got rid of it. Good. I wanted to tell you that this was designed by James Smith, who was the most celebrated architect of around 1700 in Scotland, and pioneered the use of the Palladian style in Scotland, which is a rather nice link with Italy, with Florence. And his most famous house is called Newhales, and it's on the edge of Edinburgh in a village by the sea called Musselburgh. And the centre bays, the centre 7 bays are of 1686, and then the outer wings were added about 1720. And inside the house is very, very unspoilt. And Arjun, who mentioned not only brick, but lime, giving a great deal of emphasis to the lime, will be interested to know that the darker areas of the surface of that house are the original lime harling, very carefully conserved, and the lighter areas are where it was necessary to do it again. I was Director of Conservation of the National Trust for Scotland at the time of the restoration of this house, and we took a great deal of trouble to preserve every fragment of old lime harling or plastering and to repair it, and very carefully not to make it look exactly, make the new plaster look like the old, so that you can read which is old and which is not old. Perhaps most magnificent of all is the mausoleum of William Adam, 1689 to 1748, almost the same dates as Johann Sebastian Bach and Georg Friedrich Handel, two great Baroque composers so famous throughout Europe and the world. And William Adam was the classic example of a Baroque architect in Scotland and for Britain as well. And this mausoleum was designed by his eldest son, John Adam, in 1753. And you may know that John had two younger brothers called Robert, probably the most famous of all Scottish architects, and James. And they had their practice in London and worked all over the country. But when you look inside the mausoleum, you see on the right a portrait bust of William Adam, rather a fine one, and underneath it is a sarcophagus with one of his buildings, Hopetoun House, carved on the front. And rather curiously, I don't know if you can see it, but on that sarcophagus at the right-hand side, there are three columns and then other columns falling on the ground. And this is meant to remind us that just as we living will die, so buildings also have their natural term of life. And eventually, even if it's only after hundreds of years, they may, like the ruins of antiquity, of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, they may fall down. So it's rather curious, but it's a beautiful piece of iconography and reminds us that burial grounds and their monuments express meanings. They're not only beautiful or interesting. So inside the mausoleum, you cannot enter it, which is very sensible because there are railings, but there is so much detailed information. You could practically write a book out of the information given in this particular mausoleum. I have never seen so long inscriptions in a mausoleum anywhere else. And then there are other curiosities or interests. Many celebrated people, including Sir Robert Sibbald, whose mausoleum, there's a detail of it on the right. He was a distinguished physician and scientist, late 17th, early 18th century. And on the left, you've got a poet called Franz Hedrick, commemorated. And rather strangely, it says, of Prague, Austria, because most of us recognize Prague as being the capital of the Czech Republic, and before that of Czechoslovakia. But in his day, Prague was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So I suppose, in a way, it is not wholly incorrect to say Prague, Austria, although Czech people might find it rather puzzling. But whenever I see this headstone, I think, what an interesting story must lie behind this stone, the life of this man who was born in Prague and died in Edinburgh and married to somebody called Janet Ann Barron, who was clearly Scottish, I would say. And so, you know, the loving relationship between the two of them meant that they got married and lived in Edinburgh, and that he died in Edinburgh and not back in his home country. So, as I've said before, trees and greensward predominate and have to be managed. And there, again, you've got the almost like a landscape park, and not very many stones, because a lot of them have been taken away, which I think is regrettable. But it's to make maintenance easier. So who does do the maintenance of the 6 burial grounds in the Edinburgh World Heritage Site? One day, when I was walking in another of the cemeteries, the New Carlton Cemetery, I actually met the team, and here are 2 of them. There are 6 of them altogether, and they not only have to look after the ones in the World Heritage Site, but 2 enormous cemeteries on the outskirts of Edinburgh. And they explained to me what a tough job they was. They seemed to enjoy it. They were very enthusiastic and committed to it, but they said It's just too big a job. We can't get round as often as we would like. But what I think is also a pity is that they are plainly not gardeners, although maybe they would like to be, but they're not allowed to be gardeners. And their managers do not seem to understand that every cemetery has its own cultural significance, its own beauty, its own memories, and its own meanings. And it seems to me that a fundamental act that needs to be undertaken by someone, perhaps the Edinburgh World Heritage Trust, is to record and analyze the particular characters of these different burial grounds before they're lost. Because at the moment, they all seem rather the same, and it's because they're maintained the same. Only the grass, only the trees are really dealt with. There are no flowers, no flowering shrubs, no joy. Great shame. But then there's the positive side. So, and another thing is that whereas in the Greyfriars churchyard, you get some of the most distinguished men and women of Scotland in former centuries, in the New Carlton burial ground where we are now, they tend to be people involved in local city government, businessmen, craftspeople. And this splendid little temple of a mausoleum has on its end John Gow, coach builder, Edinburgh, 1833. Of course, at that time, all well-to-do people living in Edinburgh had horses and coaches. That was the only way to get around. And so a good coach builder, like a good car manufacturer, was absolutely indispensable to civilized life. And by the look of that temple and its superb craftsmanship, he must have been a jolly good coach builder and done really well. Returning for a moment to the Greyfriars burial ground, those areas which are not park-like tend to be like serried streets of monuments, like you might say cities of the dead. And in fact, when I was walking up that row of tombs the other day, I thought to myself, this feels rather like being at Pompeii. You know, everything seems truncated, everything seems not straight and rather neglected. How much nicer would be a visit to such a burial ground if they could follow the example of the English cemetery in Florence? Much more love, more joy, more colour, and critical, I think, is the use of volunteers, people who are doing it for love, and because they understand plants and how to treat them, how to handle them, how to make the most of them. So it's more than in any other city I know, the cemeteries are, partly because of the very steep, hilly nature of Edinburgh, they become very, very interrelated with the urban texture of the city. So you can stand in Greyfriars churchyard and see like a panorama of some of the most historic buildings of the city. Just out of sight to the left is the castle, for example, but straight ahead is a wonderful spire or steeple designed by Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin, one of the most famous British architects of the 19th century, albeit his father was French and fled at the time of the Revolution to England. But Pugin it was who designed the detail of the Houses of Parliament or Palace of Westminster. And that steeple, which we can see from our home in Edinburgh, is by him. Sadly, so many monuments appear to be totally neglected. I've known this monument since about 1990, and nothing has ever been done to improve its state. But as you can see, it's suffering terribly. Open joints, as you see in the photograph on the right, deposits from atmospheric pollution, vegetation growing, rising damp or humidity. It's a tragic state, and yet it is a beautiful work of art. Here's another example, again, a beautiful work of art, like a temple front with rather moving sculpture, but the vegetation is taking over. Our English painter, John Piper, in 1949, published an essay in which he invented the phrase pleasing decay. And there is a real sense in which decay is pleasing, picturesque, charming, delightful, but it can go too far. And clearly it is on the way to going too far in the case of the condition of this monument, with the weathering surfaces lost at the top of the entablature, vegetation rampant, and again, pollution from atmospheric pollution. It's really a tragic sight, even though it has a certain sad beauty about it. And when you neglect places, whether they're gardens or houses or churches or temples, whatever they are, if you neglect them, it invites vandalism and antisocial behavior. And as you can see, there is abundant evidence of that here and there in these 6 wonderful historic cemeteries. One day, I met this young couple. This wasn't a week ago, it was a year or 2 ago, when I was visiting the Canongate churchyard. And I had the most delightful conversation with them, and I rather admired their courage. They had come to Edinburgh looking to find a livelihood, but they found everything impossibly expensive. And so, rather than doing nothing, they bought a tent, and they found a quiet place to put it, which happened to be in the back of the Canongate churchyard. And they said no one had ever disturbed them. I didn't disturb them, I just happened to be walking past at the right moment, and when they popped out, and we had a lovely chat. And that part of the burial ground you see on the right is the private burial ground of a great nobleman of the past, the Earl of Marchmont. And it seemed to me a rather ironic comparison between 2 brave but poor young people trying to find their way in the world and the rather ostentatious private burial place of a noble earl. So now we're looking down on that very churchyard from Carlton Hill. One of the lovely things about Edinburgh, because it's so hilly here, is that you get remarkable views from many different points. Now, I want you to look down the right-hand bottom corner of this photograph, and you will see that there is a rather neglected looking area. And when I was there 5 days ago, this is how it looked. That whole corner has been developed. And to me, it's a very shocking thing that historic burial grounds are exploited by developers in this way. I don't know the story yet, how permission was achieved, but that little part of Edinburgh is very sought after because the Parliament is 5 minutes walk away. And so there is probably a great need for good apartments where people can live who are members or officers of the Parliament. I'm not sure about that, but somebody has been allowed to develop a corner of that historic burial ground between my 2 visits. That's how it was, bottom right-hand corner. That is how it is today, shining in all its newness. I don't know what Ruskin would have thought of that. So now at the front of the very same churchyard is the Canongate Church. You can just see it in the background of the picture on the left. And when the sovereign is in residence at Holyrood Palace, it is the Royal Parish Church. So, you know, they could do better, you could say. But it provides us with a really witty and enjoyable example of the interpenetration of a landscape of memory with the wider urban landscape by means of, and I wonder who thought of this, by means of commissioning a sculpture of a poet called Robert Fergusson, who sadly died in his 25th year, much mourned. by Edinburgh people, apparently, because he was very, very gifted and very, very delightful and had a great future. And so anyway, there he is commemorated on the pavement with an inscription. And then you walk into churchyard and there is his tomb almost immediately on the left. And on the right, his epitaph was composed by Robert Burns, our national poet. Extraordinary story that, isn't it? Really remarkable. It's not easy for me. Let's see if I can read it. No sculptured marble here, nor pompous lay, that means a poem or a song, no storied urn, nor animated bust. This simple stone directs pale Scotia's way to pour her sorrows, or her, what's that say? Dust is the last word, poet's dust, to pour her sorrows, or her poet's dust. Isn't that lovely? And fancy having your epitaph written by a poet as famous as Robert Burns. He and Shakespeare are the two authors whom you literally meet anywhere you can go in the world. People know about them, don't they? And Burns night suppers are held not only in Scotland, but in many, many countries worldwide. From the Canongate churchyard, we can actually see the monument to Robert Burns himself. In the photograph, it is top left in the distance, and it's like a temple, a circular temple. And there it is on the right by Thomas Hamilton, 1830, so rather late in date, at a time when when Edinburgh regarded itself and was often called the Athens of the North, and so was very much influenced by Greek architecture and art. And the monument is a sort of loose version of the choragic monument of Lysicrates in Athens. And happily, it is an example of a very, very successful conservation program. It has been beautifully repaired with very good line pointing, and a few of the stones had to be replaced, but not very many. And it's a beautiful space inside. When we have monuments open weekends in September in Scotland, it's usually possible to go inside. And there was a beautiful marble sculpture inside of Robert Burns by a leading early 19th century sculptor, but it's now in the National Portrait Gallery, which is perfectly appropriate since more people can see it. So I'm going to end here. I conceived this talk as a homage to the English cemetery in Florence, but I'm wondering what lessons ideally we could learn in either directions. There must be some things we do in Scotland that are good, and there are many things that you do in Florence that are excellent. And I think that the energy and the love that Julia and others have poured into the cemetery in Florence is a lesson to us all. And showing you the Burns monument, as I just did, reminds us of the many indissoluble links between Scotland and Italy. So many of our architects spent their formative years in Italy, always in Rome, often in Florence as well, Naples, Lucca, and so on. So thank you all very much for listening to the talk. And especially thank you to Julia and Arjun for having the idea of this conference and organizing it. And greetings from us two Scottish companions of Ruskin's Gilda St. George. And there we are interacting with the Robert Ferguson sculpture and enjoying it very much, as we are enjoying this day. Thank you.
Peter, that was so, okay, we've got somebody who's wanting to enter. That was so much after my heart. Noi chiamiamo il nostro progetto dalle tombe alle cui e lavoriamo con i personaggi più disprezzati qui in Roma. Ho avuto un candidato per la ordinazione nel 2020 lei metodista con 5 figlie e 2 di queste figlie, gemelli, sono bravissimi a scrivere, a scrivere le lettere sul marmo. E ho visto loro venire da Hastings, infatti, a Firenze per insegnare questo ai miei uomini. Prima, quando sono arrivata a me, dicendo che possono fare il restauro delle tombe e il giardinaggio, neanche hanno potuto scrivere i loro nomi. E abbiamo usato questo come un metodo per l'alfabetizzazione di questi cittadini europei. E anche hanno capito come fare queste incisioni. E questo era bellissimo perché hanno fatto l'incisione per la pietra per Frederick Douglass, schiavo che ha visitato il cimitero degli inglesi per onorare tutti i Theodore Parker e Richard Hoover in 1887, 11 maggio. E questa casa è il nostro cimitero. E poi lui, Frederick Douglass, ha avuto un'amica che si chiama Sara Parker, anche lei. Lei ha fatto discorsi con ha studiato a Bedford College a Londra, il luogo dove le donne possono studiare, e anche ha studiato la medicina e Giuseppe Martini ha scritto la lettera per lei essere ammessa alla Santa Maria Nuova Ospedale per studiare. E Daniel e i suoi antenati in Europa erano iniziati e poi ha fatto anche le lampe delle lei. E questo sarà messo accanto di Monotesta nel corridoio Santa Maria Nuova. Perché credo importante anche a Rosy Venezione. Importante anche includere, dare la storia anche a quelli privati, per dare la dignità umana a tutti, la memoria. E ora è cercato di nascondere. Rosy, sono molto contenta che lei è venuta di poco. C'è dottore Llewellyn Jones e arriva per dare la sua relazione. Sì. Se chiudiamo questo, and, okay, bene. Okay, Rosie.
Hello.
Bene, okay. Lei è pronta? Are you ready for your talk now? And can we
stop share?
Chiudere questo slide sharing?
Dovrebbe toglierlo. Ecco.
Bene,
perfetto.
okay. And Rosie, as it will be your turn now. Rosie is a member of the
Hello. Lost the sound.
E lei darà la relazione in inglese. Allora, sì. Okay. Bene, se fosse se sarà il suo ritratto. Sì, ok. You can begin, okay.
Right, thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you, Julia, Sister Julia, Professor Julia, for inviting me to speak. I wasn't quite sure what to prepare because initially I thought I was going to talk about BAXA, which is the British Association for Cemeteries in South Asia. So I'd just perhaps like to say a little bit of that at the start, because this is how I got involved. BAXA, as I will call it, was set up nearly 50 years ago, and it was set up by an Englishman who'd been born in India, in Kanpur. He went to India in the early 1970s to show his son something of the family history. And when he got there, he was absolutely appalled at the condition of the old British cemeteries. As you know, the British left in 1947 and they left their cemeteries behind. There was some talk that they should be all demolished, but luckily people spoke out against that. And we estimate that there are certainly about 1,000 known cemeteries in the Indian subcontinent. This includes Pakistan and Bangladesh, as well as India. We think there are over 800 in India. And over the last 50 years, we've done our best to map them and importantly, to record the headstones and the memorials, because we know, obviously, they're not going to remain in India forever. And in fact, quite a number have already gone. Though some, I'm happy to say, are protected by the Archaeological Survey of India. Some are heritage sites. I don't know if any of you are familiar with South Park Street, Calcutta, but that's an absolutely magnificent site of huge 18th century tombs, obelisks, memorials, all kinds of things. And a number of prominent people are buried there. Sir William Jones, for one. So this is my background, really. I'm an Indian historian. And when the chance to do something about cemeteries in South Asia came along, I jumped at it. And I've been editing the journal, which is called Chokidar, and that means a watch person, a watchman, for nearly 50 years. So that's my background, and this is why I was invited to talk. Now, having said we look after the graves in as far as we can of Britons in South Asia, that doesn't exclude the odd item about Indians who have died outside India, outside South Asia. You probably know that Raja Mohan Roy, one of the most prominent people in the Bengal Renaissance, actually died in Bristol. He was on a visit, sadly died, and he was actually buried because at that time cremation was illegal, forbidden in Britain. So he was actually buried, and a very fine memorial was erected over his grave. And every year, even today, the British High Commission make a pilgrimage to the site of his grave and say prayers and place memorials there. And we also have other prominent Indians buried in Britain. Dwarkanath Tagore is actually one of my favorites. He was the grandfather of Rabindranath Tagore. And I like him because I think he was actually a lot more fun than his grandson. He certainly made a huge impression on English society in the early 19th century. It was said that he had several affairs with English ladies, so we quite like him. Sadly, he died at the peak of his powers in 1846, and he's buried in Kensal Green Cemetery, which is in North London. I visited it a few years ago with a Bengali friend who wanted to pay his own tribute. It's a very, very plain memorial, and again, it marks a grave rather than a cremation site. Just recently, in the same cemetery, I found a single memorial to somebody who's just described as an Indian judge. His name was Dewanji. We don't know very much about him, but we hope to. So, as I say, Baxter isn't exclusively dealing with the Britons who died in South Asia. So we do have the little excursion. This is why the story of Kolhapur really fascinated me, because I'd never heard of the Raja before. I knew about Kolhapur. It's a fairly small Maratha state, or was a Maratha state, and quite troublesome actually in the 18th century for the East India Company. But they managed to sort things out in their usual way. They didn't annex the state, but they made sure there was a political agent there who was going to keep a very close eye on Raja Ram. And if he had stepped out of line, they certainly would have stepped in and they would have deposed him. In fact, they had a great say-so on who actually succeeded him and how he himself had actually come to the throne. So it was interference, if you like, and it was interference of not exactly a benign kind, but they certainly wanted to make sure that as the young Raja was growing up, he was properly educated. And this meant having an English tutor and Captain Edward West from the engineers was appointed. It may sound strange, but this is how it works. You would appoint a military man who would then supervise the young man's education. And they did this by teaching them English, by teaching them morals, if you like, and in fact by infiltrating all of the sort of Indian ideas. So they're looking at an English way of life, an English Victorian way of life. And you're bringing up this young Indian man as an early Victorian, if you like. And I think it's this that actually sparked off his desire to come to England. He met Queen Victoria's second son, Alfred, I think his name was, when he came to Bombay. And this seems to have spurred him on to want to know more about England. He's not the first Indian by any means to come to England. We know that there were quite a number. Muhammad Din, probably one of the earliest, and he wrote his memoirs. Yusuf Khan Kamalposh is one of my favorites because he actually attended Queen Victoria's coronation, standing in the street and saying how magnificent it was. And he was very, very pro-English. And the funny thing is that these early Indian people who did come to England generally seemed very, very happy to do so. They were not critical. And in fact, Campbell Push says something interesting. He says that the British in England are much, much different from the British in India. And I thought that was an interesting statement. And what they really enjoyed was the freedom as they saw it, the fact that women were not sequestered or not in purdah, that kind of thing, and a general freedom that they enjoyed. And they also went to see the sites, the tourist sites in London, as Raja Ram did. He headed straight off for Madame Tussauds, the Waxworks Museum. St. Paul's Cathedral was a favorite, and they used to go up into the Whispering Gallery and walk around there. The theatre was very popular, and Raja Ram really enjoyed going to the opera to listen to Adelina Patti. He thought she was absolutely wonderful. He also went to Kew Gardens, to the Crystal Palace, which was then still standing in Hyde Park, to the Tower of London, to Richmond Park. And in a way, Raja Ram's diary is useful for us because it shows what were the attractions at the time, what was viable at the time. One thing that particularly interested me was the Raja is said to have had a kind of scientific technical interest in things. And he showed this by going to a couple of lectures at the Regent Street Polytechnic, which were on, I think, the Suez Canal. And he saw magic lantern slides, which were quite a new innovation at the time. He enjoyed that. And he also went to the electric telegraph office. And again, that's something else that interests me a lot, because the electric telegraph had been developed in England in the 1830s, but didn't actually reach India until almost 15 years later. And then it ran along the side of the railways. You could send messages about when trains were coming and that kind of thing. And I could see how much that would interest the Raja, because while he was there, a message was sent to India. I'm not sure if it was to the Viceroy or not, but it was received within 5 minutes, and back came the tap, tap, tap answer. And he was fascinated by this early and quick communication with his homeland. So I quite warmed to the Raja. And also, despite his bulk, he was apparently quite a large man. He enjoyed cricket. He enjoyed dancing. He was quite good on the dance floor. And he also played croquet. And there's an account of him playing croquet on the lawn of a country house in England. And I rather like the idea of this plump man who never took off his turban playing away at croquet. I think he made a good impression in England. I think there's absolutely no doubt of that. And also, as I say in my paper, it was important for the British government to say, here is a reigning Hindu prince, the first one, in fact, the first Hindu reigning prince has come to Britain. So they pulled out the red carpet, literally and metaphorically. And they arranged for him to meet Queen Victoria twice at Windsor Castle, and he was also taken to the Houses of Parliament and met Disraeli and Gladstone. So he really enjoyed his time in England. He was in England for 5 months, and that also included a visit to Ireland, a visit to Scotland, and a visit to the industrial Midlands, which I thought was quite interesting. It was then something that people wanted to see because it showed, you know, the remains of the Industrial Revolution, things that were happening in India had actually started in the Midlands. So anyway, he decides to travel back through Europe, and he leaves, I think it was, sorry, he leaves, I think, 1870, I think. And things seem to go fairly well. He goes through Belgium and he arrives in Italy. He was avoiding France because at the time it was the Franco-Prussian War. He didn't want to go. He would have liked to have gone to Paris, but it wasn't particularly safe at the time. And when he gets to Italy, he starts to complain of rheumatism at first. He finds it difficult to walk. And then he has a fever. Whether it's rheumatic fever or not, we don't know. He manages to get to Venice and he's carried around in a sedan chair. He's carried to his carriage and he goes to see St. Mark's Square and the palace of the Doges. By the time he gets to Florence, he's quite seriously ill. And what's rather sad is that he actually stops writing his diary. He'd kept his diary in fairly good English up until then, but his last entry is the middle of November, and he's very weak and he can't walk. And very sadly, he dies in a hotel on the 30th of November, 1870. And this puts everyone into a fearful state. He's got 11 servants with him, including his Parsi tutor. And everyone is absolutely adamant he cannot be buried. He must be cremated. And I think because of his fairly high status and the fact that he'd been very accepted in England, the British consul immediately started to put things in action. Sir Augustus Paget went to see the authorities in Florence and he saw the syndic, the equivalent to the mayor, other people, and they convened a meeting. It went on until into the small hours. So by 1 o'clock in the morning, the date after the Raja's death, the 1st of December, it had been agreed that in spite of the prohibition against cremation, the Raja would actually be cremated in the park. Now, one thing I found interesting was that the year before his death, in 1869, there had been the second International Medical Conference in Florence, and 1 or 2 people doctors had actually spoken in favor of cremation. There was, in fact, Dr. Castiglione, and he was a Florentine himself, and he spoke very strongly and very movingly about the need to consider cremation, which had been banned for religious and social reasons. But he pointed out it was, in fact, a much more sanitary procedure to have cremations rather than sometimes improper burials. The burials weren't deep enough. And he also, interestingly enough, pointed out that where you have battles, the battlefield, the corpses were just left there. And I think he was probably thinking of Waterloo at the time, even though this had happened many years earlier. So my feeling is that there was slightly more sympathy towards the idea of cremation in Florence than there probably would have been anywhere else in Italy at the time. So anyway, in the end, it was all arranged. The municipal police were informed and they were very helpful. And the municipal sanitary commission were brought on board. They were also helpful too. And so during the early hours of the morning, the servants carried the Raja's body on, it would have been a bier, it's actually described as a plank of wood. they decided to take him in the hotel's carriage. They couldn't carry him in the open because it would have attracted too many crowds. But as it was, by the time they got to the park, there were a huge number of people, of sightseers and carriages. And a funeral pyre had already been built. I think this was probably something to do with the municipal police who'd sprung into action. And they managed to get fairly substantial branches and firewood together, and the pyre was about 3 foot high. So the Raja's body was placed on it, and his face was turned towards the east, towards his homeland. And the servants were there with little paper lanterns. There was no other illumination. So you can imagine it was quite a spooky sort of scene in the winter, in the dark, these little paper lanterns lighting the site of a funeral pyre, which had not been seen in Italy before. And the cremation was over by about 10 o'clock that morning. There was quite a strong north wind, and this fanned the flames. And when it was all over, the police actually helped the servants to gather up the ashes and the remains, 1 or 2 little bones, and put them into a porcelain jar, which was sealed up. That was taken back to Kolhapur, and the ashes, etc., were put into the Ganges, the holy river. So that part of the Hindu rite was performed. And as for the statue and the canopy, I can't find out who paid for it, but I'm sure somebody can. And the British really did him proud. They appointed an English sculptor, Fuller, who was actually living in Florence at the time. And he sculpted a very nice bust, which was based on photographs that the Raja had taken when he was in London. He's there with his very characteristic Maratha turban on. He's actually looking a bit more handsome in the sculptured bust than he is in the photographs, but never mind. And the canopy, which is lovely, it's very Indian, was put up by Major Charles Mant, and Mant was one of the Bengal engineers. It was not unusual at that time for the engineers to have military titles, and he designed this rather pleasing canopy. And I think probably as a result of that, he was then asked to design the new palace at Kolhapur, which is an absolutely amazing building, sort of Indo-Gothic and all kinds of other things. I was amazed when I saw a photograph of it. And in fact, I feel almost inspired to go to Kolhapur and see it myself. It's wonderful. And Mant eventually went mad and committed suicide because he had a feeling his buildings were going to fall down. This absolutely wasn't true. So there we have we have a very nice bust. We have a very nice canopy. And I was delighted when I was researching for this article to find out that the whole thing has been renovated and it looks really good. And again, this is something I would like to come and see. So this is just a short resume of what Baxter is about, my association, and the Raja of Kolhapur. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Rosie Llewellyn-Jones. That was splendid. Now we've been able to get the story both in Italian and in English, because Amina Ameli, if you could come and be seen by the Queen, she is the restorer of the tomb and for the Comune of Florence. And she explained that actually it wasn't that huge sum, it was left, because the amount included funds also for restoring other buildings in Florence. But it was a large sum, nevertheless. Yes. And we think that the Maharaja paid for part of that, yes? Right, right. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Il porto dico in italiano, comprendeva anche il restauro delle mura del Forte Belvedere.
Okay, also included the restoration of the wall as elsewhere.
Of the walls of Forte Belvedere.
Of the Forte Belvedere, which was built by the Duke Alexander who was the son of a black slave. Alessandro de Medici.
Quello era la protettiva. Questo è per vedere ed è buon talento.
Sì, okay. Right.
Looks
So,
lovely.
So we're getting a lot of the history of what has happened in Florence. In my cemetery now, we're only allowed cremation, ashes, soltanto cremazione, perché siamo dentro la città, il muro è tolto, and we can only permit what is sterile within city limits. But does anyone have questions also from all of, everyone can unmute and you can also join in with comments and so forth. We also have Kana. She is from Japan. She is in Japan. And she has done a wonderful study, there you are, of tombs in India shaped like pyramids and obelisks. And she came to my cemetery just days before this conference, just by chance. But Julian of Norwich says nothing is by chance. And she was looking for obelisks in our cemetery. We have obelisks in cemeteries, but they're not the complex, eclectic forms that you find in Indian cemeteries, like the tomb of Rose Aylmer or the tomb of the admiral whose daughter married into the Banks family, who are buried with us. Instead, they tend to be more elaborate and so forth. But she was pointing out that Van Brugge, the architect, saw these temples, these burial grounds in India, and then was copying them in English gardens with the follies, such as at Stowe House. So she made a very important contribution to us in this extraordinary multicultural way, and we're very grateful for her paper. It's published in the proceedings. Kana, do you want to say something about it?
Yes, thank you very much for introducing me, and nice to see you, everyone. Yes, it was really impressive and exciting experience to attend this event. Actually, it was perfectly by chance I could have information about this event. I visited the English cemetery in Florence a few weeks ago for some quite small research, and I could talk to Professor Holloway, and I got the information of this event. And so I'm so happy to be here. And as Professor Holloway explained, my main interest concerning the cemetery and India and Italy is I'm trying to know how European people started building obelisk-shaped tombstones. It is often said that was started after the Egyptian campaign by Napoleon, but it's not true actually. Yes, it's at least in India, we could see so many obelisk-shaped tombstones in 18th century and probably even in 17th century. So on the basis, my interest is about the kind of so-called Orientalism. The discussion about Orientalism tend to be quite monolithic based on the idea of the dichotomy between the East and the West and the ruler and the ruled. But I want to know much pluralistic and much complicated cultural relationship from the quite old time and that must be come to the present situation, I think. And so far I've been concentrating on just on the cemeteries in British cemeteries in India and sometimes Dutch cemeteries in India. And actually, probably I'm the first Japanese who joined the Baksa, so it was very exciting to. At first time I heard the speech by Professor Rosie Llewellyn-Jones because I know her name so much. I'm one of the members of the Baksa actually. Anyhow, yes, but nowadays I feel the necessity to have more idea about the tombstones and the cemetery and not only the cemetery and tombstone, but the more funeral expression in Europe before 18th century. So that's why I visited Italy in March. So my idea is so limited, so I really hope to have more opportunity to talk to you, and I'd like to learn more. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I also hope to say just one thing. Yes, Arjun, I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Arjun Jain, because your talk reminds me my expression in Delhi. I studied at Delhi University, so I know all the places you referred, and I really love the city. It's a quite bit complicated, sometimes difficult, and quite attractive city. But unfortunately, I've never been to the Red House only. So next time, I really hope to visit there. So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone.
Yes.
Anna, will you be speaking? Will you be speaking in the conference next time? Julia, will she be?
Excuse me.
Will she be speaking as well?
I think Akana has just spoken, and it was a wonderful discourse, and we're very grateful for that, because it was an important link, global link between us. And I do find the study of cemeteries is fascinating. When I went to Iceland in 2000, the sheep have eaten all of the trees in Iceland except in the cemeteries. And the cemeteries, strangely enough, have tombs shaped just like ours. They're very European, although Iceland is almost America. But the trees gnarl amongst the tombs, and they're extraordinary. It's very beautiful, and I have a whole series of photographs of them under the snow, and also when the snow has melted. And also people have sent me wonderful photographs of Park Street Cemetery in Kolkata. And I feel that this is a kind of, it's just the way we felt rather strange walking through our Villa Stibad, learning about all of the international styles of armor. Although we found ourselves not a Lebanese family with their son said, this place is full of things about war. At least cemeteries, they may be about death, but they're about love, not war. They're about caring and the memories of the people. And I love the descendants coming from all over the world to my cemetery and their delight in finding their ancestors. I think we really need to go back to having this knowledge of our ancestors and this respect. It doesn't need to be commercial and expensive, but it does need to be about love and knowledge. And I feel that that has been what we have tried to do with our cemetery, with its research into its beauty, making it beautiful again with its garden and its irises, but also finding out how wonderful the people were. They were working against slavery. They gave first-class burials to their servants. The king's son insisted on his servant's grave being exactly the same as his own, the son of King William IV, and so on. And I loved the will of the Thomas Kidd, who left money and reparations to his Indian servants, saying he had been mistaken in forcing on them Anglo culture, feeling that instead they should have been allowed their families, their own languages, their own culture, and that he had to, in a sense, make amends for this more broad-mindedness. And our cemetery is full of people of all nations and religions and alphabets and so forth, peaceably coming together. The foreign community in Florence, who contributed so much. Elizabeth's poetry, the book we have just published of her poetry in Italian, is titled O Bella Libertà, the little boy singing below her window. And we now have a petition trying to bring the son of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Penn, who's born between Casa Grande Windows Part 1 and Part 2, to be by his mother. And we've people are just signing that petition list all over the place, students, American students, and so forth, the participants. But I'm so grateful to everyone who has participated in this conference. And I thank all of you. Remember that on the 23rd, there's the second session. Faremo questo convegno a Delhi. Sarà lo stesso invito, però sarà aperto da Arjun nel Red House a Delhi. Va bene? And thank you all of you. Any more comments before we close? Well, when you come to my seminar, right? Okay, and thank you. Okay, finisciamo, shall we end? And thank you all very, very much. And right. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Kana. Thank you, Arjun. Thank you, Peter, and so forth. Okay, end meeting for all.